Hi there, and welcome to this webinar from Victor Davis. Today we're going to be talking about achieving connected data governance, unlocking the power of your data to help you effectively compete and comply. So just a couple of bits of housekeeping before we start. Is the session being recorded? Yes, we're recording this session, and we'll share a link with each of you afterwards so you can rewatch or share within your organisation. We'll also send you a copy of the slides for the same purpose and a link that you can use to download them or to circulate within your organisation. If you're interested in having a private rerun of this webinar for a group of colleagues in your organisation, we can arrange that. Just let us know after the presentation is over. All the lines are on mute, so if you want to ask questions, please use the Q&A chat function. My colleague Rachel is manning that today, and we'll answer questions at the end. If we run out of time, then we'll follow up with each of you separately at the end as well. So just briefly to introduce the presenters, the main presenter today is Steve. Steve Parry is our Senior VP Advisory Services here at Victor Davis, and also on the webinar is Rachel Clinton, who works for us in business development, and as I said, she'll be picking up with you at the end on the Q&A section. So I'm going to hand over to Steve now for the bulk of the presentation.
Yes, thanks, Laura. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. But yes, let's begin. Already introduced ourselves. So before I go too much further, just a word about the structure of today's presentation. A few words of introduction about Victor Davis. Many of you on the line won't know us by that name, so I'll explain that briefly. And then the main topic of today, so connected data governance. What is connected data governance? Why is that a challenge for most organizations? And then what I'd like to do by using an example tool set, this time from Informatica, look at Axon and EDC as an example of two tools that can take us through a business scenario, illustrating the connection in connected data governance. So briefly, Victor Davis, we are an organization that's come together from companies that you may have come across in the past, formed publicly in January 2019, and the organization's entity group and Jibes in the Netherlands, and more recently companies like Simplexia and Bloom Consulting and Datadogs have come together to form a larger organization, but also one that has more not only scale but capability in adjacent sectors in the data management world. We operate, as we can see from the map there, primarily our primary markets are US, UK, and Benelux, and we're supported in those operations with colleagues in both Mexico and over in India. Advisory services, we help organizations think about the options, the choices, the obligations they have in managing data as a strategic asset. That normally equates to things like data governance, data strategy, cloud, the journey to cloud, and probably in an increasing context for connections we have with our clients is adoption of digital possibilities, either as a digital native organization or one that's under digital transformation. Delivery, probably the largest part of what we do, is delivering sometimes complex but information management projects to deliver value and outcomes. And managed services is us managing business as usual for many of our clients worldwide. Some of that is repeated on this slide in terms of advisory, delivery services and managed services. And I'll just briefly say on the right-hand side, foundational data management. So looking after, for example, single view of customer or object or location, data integration, moving data around, managing APIs and so on. So the foundational part of what you need to do as an enterprise. And on the left-hand side, utilization. So how to probably exploit is a good word sometimes, or leverage the value of data in terms of analytics, cognitive intelligence, what is often referred to these days as data science in a number of forms, and of course business analytics. So moving along to how we describe and how we approach what I'm calling connected data governance. Firstly, a look back over the last couple of years as Entity Group, one of the constituent companies of Victor Davis. We published a book, some of you will come across, and there's a gentleman in the corner reading a copy of it, The Data Delta, which in our view bridges the gap that often exists between the data an organization has and those business people who need that information to give it value and to undergo that digital transformation. The title of this WebEx, of this presentation today, includes how do you get measurable value from data, and I don't need to go through every one of these steps, but just to point out, there is often a sequence. There are many on-ramps to this road, but without executive sponsorship, some idea of where you're going, some concept of maturity, where do I need to get to, and how quickly, with the data architecture, is going to be difficult to achieve those measurable benefits. So governance, the glue, if you like, that knits together these various elements of our information strategy. Managing the crossing of your own data delta, if you like, to provide that measurable value. As I say, it's not serial. There are many entry points to this and many different levels of maturity to start with. The data delta message is all about this, really. It's the thinking big, implementing small way forward. In other words, taking a slice, those small achievable initiatives around data, what we term slices. Each one of those, according to our data delta method, would challenge you to say, is the data around this initiative owned properly, described properly, of sufficient quality, and so on? Do we control the access to it? Is it used and shared adequately? And is the technology that supports it and controls it in place? Really what we're looking at is, if I just complete the slide, is a balancing act. It's a balancing act between the obligations that you have in terms of managing data. It could be compliance, it could be risk management, could be the safety of that data, with the opportunity, so digital transformation or marketing or using data in more innovative ways. As we try and compete and comply while keeping our data safe, we're going to be needing to control existing applications and new initiatives on our roadmap. What I'm getting to is, well, this might be easy to say, how you actually do it relies on understanding the metadata that describes some of those initiatives. So business leaders are trying to achieve many things with their data, and this just briefly shows the opportunity to use data on the right-hand side, either in a improve your efficiency way, so an improvement of the bottom part of this matrix, or in a more innovative way. And the same on the left-hand side when we look at the obligations that we have. The point of this slide really is that all of these initiatives have metadata that needs to be catalogued, connected, so we can control those initiatives. So that last word really, how do we keep control? How do we get control and then keep it? So everyone's trying to use data to compete while complying. For most people, that means that series of projects or initiatives to move the data agenda forward. Organizations then need to understand and describe the data that powers their business. So those of you who are familiar with GDPR, for example, huge news, of course, 1 year ago as we move towards the date in May for compliance with GDPR, but really the context in which we operate from that date on. So we need to have demonstrable compliance. Again, a key for that will be the metadata that describes how we use data to support our business. So there are various collections of metadata, but often these provide a partial, if you like, a siloed view. And sometimes in organizations, large and small, we'll find that different individuals, different business groups have a way of describing things using a different language, maybe literally a different language, and a different focus. And there's a difference also between the business groups and the technical groups and the way they describe their data. That leaves us with a situation that we really need to manage and move on from. What I've described here are islands of metadata. So the existing applications, or indeed the initiatives that we have at the business level, all have metadata that describes what is needed in order to get those different applications working. Just a couple of examples here. So DW could well be data warehouse. Down at a technical level, it's probably well understood what your hierarchies and your dimensions and your fact tables and so on look like in your data warehouse. But how well aligned are the definitions that you have at a technical level there with, for example, the business intelligence that you may well find up at the business level? The same would be true with ERP, maybe multiple instances of that, maybe a description of a single view of vendor, which may exist at the business level, may not even be implemented at a technical level. So we have plenty of metadata, but is it catalogued? Is it connected? And can we realistically use it to control the balance between opportunity and obligation? So most organizations know there's some kind of problem here, but they may not know how to solve it. And that may well mean, how do I get started? Or how do I breathe new life into existing data governance initiatives? They may well, most large organizations have started something over the past few years that may have run out of steam, may not have gained wide scale acceptance or driven any engagement. Another thing is, who is responsible for data governance in an organization? And different job titles abound, really. So chief digital officer, chief data officer, data protection officer, together with more traditional titles, so CIO and of course business unit managers. Who owns data? Is it IT or is it the business? I've said here that both those groups, if indeed that they are distinct groups, both of those groups are affected by data issues on a regular basis. They tend to come at the solution or attempting the solution to those problems from different angles. So the key, I'm suggesting, is the old one really, which is to get IT teams and business teams pulling in the same direction. I'll just introduce, one or two of you on the call may have seen this before, but I'll just introduce the idea of a collaboration corridor. What have I done here? It's to suggest that any organization, if I look at the y-axis, the ability to articulate business requirements, there's varying degrees of skill in doing that. Do I know what I want? And on the x-axis, the ability and capacity to implement technology. And if we look at the sort of the two quadrants here, business pull and technical push, very often we find initiatives in the business pull area from perhaps frustrated business owners wanting more from their IT delivery over the years. And to sort of counteract that, we find some organizations pushing technical solutions, perhaps without the engagement, sponsorship, or understanding of their business community, the build it and they will come type approach. And what I'm saying here is that understanding that and sort of charting that in your own organization is perhaps a good starting point. I'm not suggesting that we can't have applications or initiatives in the business pull box or the technical push box. But what I am saying is that for some, and an increasingly important group of initiatives, they must exist in what we're calling here the collaboration corridor. It would be pointless, for example, to have point solutions for risk management, holistic risk management, for example, around BCBS 239. They would have to be, by definition, in the zone that pulled business and technical folks together. Okay, so all I've done there is to say there's a bit of a problem, and here's a nice way, in my view, of diagramming that. But what do we do about it? What I'm suggesting is that the business folks and IT folks are both already interested in metadata, and the kind of things that they will be discussing, some in some detail and some at a sort of superficial level, will be a little bit different. From a business perspective, I may be looking at projects, I may be trying to understand the return on investment of some initiative. To what extent does it support a business objective? It will involve processes, certain data sets. What is the quality of data in those data sets? What systems am I talking about? Who owns the whole thing? Talking at a business level. Meanwhile, the technical community are probably more tied up with the physical, the network, the access, the performance type metadata that we talk about here. So the definition of columns in a traditional relational database, or in a NoSQL database, what does that actually look like physically? Or perhaps the usage or performance that I'm getting from a certain application. There may well be audit data that I'm looking to, or a universal identification of users and access rights and so on. Point being that these are, if we're not careful, two separate and isolated communities. Thinking back to the collaboration corridor, a collaborative effort would need to at least make a link between these two things. So if enterprise-wide data governance involves linking the business and IT community at the very least, let's have a look at how we might go about doing that. Data governance can't happen in a silo for some of the reasons I've mentioned. It's going to require communication and cooperation across the organization. Sometimes that's going to surface one or two conversations that may not have been had successfully in the past around, for example, data ownership. We all know managing things locally, initiatives, data, people, assets locally is relatively easy. It's when you start having to share and collaborate across maybe a wider organization, maybe geographically, maybe different business units, maybe through merger and acquisition activity, that we end up with a number of organizational and maybe management of change issues. So once again, what I'm going to call out here is that metadata, while it's not the answer to all of these questions, it's the start of the answer. It's beginning to talk about, okay, management of change, who's affected, what systems are affected, what data are we talking about, what demonstrable compliance do I need to consider in order to move forward. Sometimes the barrier to this full collaboration and connected data governance can be a lack of political will. People either wanting to spend time or effort on something else. Maybe there's a lack of understanding of what this is all about. Maybe we just don't see the value of data governance. It's often seen as the avoidance of something negative as opposed to something in itself which is positive. So let's try and demonstrate why it can certainly be both things. Or it could be this, it could be that previous attempts haven't really worked. I may have a large repository of data models. I may have a business glossary, which is partially complete that nobody accesses. We worked with an organization fairly recently who had everything nicely documented in a set of data and process models. The issue was when we asked to see when were they last updated, it was some years before, and when were they last accessed, it was at least 9 months before. So what I'm talking about here is a much more active and sort of front and center description of metadata that catalogs, connects, and allows us to control what we're doing. So if we agree that it's worth making an effort in this area, it's worthwhile contemplating why the journey might be difficult. Vast volumes of data. It's vast volumes of data because we have just so many things to document, but it's even more because of the linkages between them. If I say catalog, that's one thing. If I then say connect, then the sheer number of potential links between items of metadata becomes complex. It's certainly way beyond a manual system or something supported by an Excel system with a process map. We're probably way beyond that. Fundamentally, the way that business folks and IT folks talk about their business can be different, often is different. The things which are important are seen as being different things. But when a business unit owner or industry leader talks about a policy or an initiative or an application, there must be some map between that and the actual application portfolio that exists or is planned in an organization. Otherwise, we don't have the basis of that dialogue. In a previous paper, still on our website, actually, we suggested that business people are from Venus, if you like, and the IT folks are from Mars. I mean, a well-known metaphor, but the point being that unless we make an effort to understand each other, it's going to be difficult to move forward. And then I've mentioned this already, but data ownership is certainly an issue. Little clarity regarding data ownership, and we found some organizations actually talk about this in very different ways. What I think is clear and what is common between different organizations is that the technical folks tend to be the custodians of data, and it's business people who would be owners of data, certainly in the eyes of the regulator, and should be in the eyes of the business itself as well. So a central oversight over who has access to what data, back to the data delta and the pyramid. We talk about access in there and usage. We can't begin to understand and chart that until we have this sort of central oversight. Maybe some of you on the call are thinking, my organization is quite top down and quite controlled, the same process the world over. That won't be true for all of you though, and some other organizations are a lot more federal, a lot more, if you like, crowdsourcing and developing a view over time is the way the policies are put together. Most will be somewhere in between. And so we have to take into account when we talk about central oversight, the culture of an organization before we can make too much progress. No two organizations are completely the same. Yes, so metadata describing the things that are important, as I've already said, is different for different groups, and it's not linked. Different tools, islands of automation if you want around metadata, and the combination of legacy systems and that siloed approach that we're suggesting here can compound to make this whole journey quite difficult. So connected data governance, so that in which we understand initiatives within an organization and the existing applications and the balance between opportunity and obligation are all described by metadata, and linking that metadata, the connection in connected data governance is central to what I'm saying. So it enables, it's part of the enabling infrastructure, if you like, effective decision making. If people don't trust the data that's held in the organization, or they don't trust the data that they see in their self-service business intelligence cube, or they don't trust as a data scientist perhaps the content of the data lake that they're looking at, then we've got some difficulty. Trustworthy data is really the starting point for both the compliance side and the compete side, if you like, of the table. Demonstrable compliance, the central box in the chart here, without a clear picture of the data you hold, its provenance and ownership, so showing lineage, ownership, which processes are involved, which parts of the organization are involved in putting that data together, we can't demonstrate compliance, and that's a key word in the legislation that describes GDPR, and increasingly the case in other parts of the world. GDPR, of course, an EU legislation, but similar things are in place in many other countries around the world, and that list is growing. It also improves your bottom line, and not for this presentation, but of course, beginning to understand how you're making use of information and how we can monetize the data that we have is very much a topic, not a new word by any means, but certainly one that in our view has received renewed emphasis, certainly in, I would say, the last 12 months. So monetization at one end of the scale, perhaps versus the ethics at the other side. Just because I can do something, should I do it? And again, metadata is the clue to where you are on that continuum. So we've got some way through the presentation this morning, or as I say, wherever you are in the world, perhaps this afternoon. And I think what I've done is suggest that there is a problem, and that connected data governance, as I've described it, could well be the starting point to that catalog, connect, and control way forward. What I'd like to do now, as I said a few minutes back, we've taken the toolset from Informatica. There's an increasing number of vendors in this space, which are certainly worth looking at. But Informatica's offering is interesting. They have two tools, one called Axon, one called EDC, the Enterprise Data Catalog. And quite neatly, to fit in with my presentation today, Axon is more or less aimed at the business community, while EDC more or less aimed at that more physical manifestation of what you might have database-wise, application-wise, behavior of data, and so on. So let's look at a simple example then of how things might go wrong if we don't have connected data governance, and then very quickly look at those two tools to help us achieve it. So we've put together an example company here, the ClaimFast Insurance Company, and suggested that they failed to comply with one of the GDPR regulations, the one relating to retention of data. So data deletion, data protection by design. So ClaimFast has, in my example here, failed to meet its delete after 3 years of inactivity policy for 28,000 records that describe data subjects. This could give exposure to significant fines and reputational damage. And the key with any regulation, GDPR no exception, is to show that you're on top of any potential exposure and that you're quickly doing something about it. So, that reputational damage, those fines, the attitude of the regulator is going to change if you don't do something demonstrable about it. So this incident has highlighted that the ClaimFast, the business owners and leaders in ClaimFast are unaware of other data-related risk that could be exposed to. Some examples here of some of the fines. I think some of you on the call will be aware of what the GDPR fines are, but they're significant. So 4% of turnover and 20,000 euros, whichever's the maximum or the greater of those two. So in the ClaimFast case, what could have happened, what has happened, and why is it difficult to locate the problem? So what's happened here is that the finance team has requested a data alignment between the different date formats in the USA and in the UK. How did that happen? Well, following a merger and acquisition transaction. And as we can quickly work out, some of the dates would be invalid if that was the way you treated them. Some of them would become ambiguous. In either case, then we've got some difficulty. So data formatting error flowed through to a management report. That was undetected. There's two issues to look at here, an IT issue and a business issue. From an IT point of view, if we're unable, as they were, to identify the lineage of data on that report, the characteristics of the source system that provided the constituent data, and the owner for that system, then we can't really chase it through. On the business side, can we quickly confirm to the regulator or to ourselves internally, have we followed the correct process? Have we done what we said and agreed that we would do to delete inactive records after 3 years? So linking the policy documentation, establishing the owner, looking at the process once again on the business side. Demonstrating data protection by design, we need to show that we have a holistic understanding of where we are from a risk point of view, a common view on data quality, completeness, accuracy, and so on. How do we, in the case of ambiguity, if you like, how do we search and inspect the definition of business terms and what is the meaning of a particular business term. Bearing in mind it's a mergers and acquisitions situation, there may be some ambiguity that's crept in. And then the key point, really, I suppose, for this presentation, no linkage between the business policies, which may have been successfully argued, documented, and agreed, and then the IT systems that manage them. We can have, and we have seen this, we can have organizations that have gone through the work at the business level and have failed to follow it through at a technical level. So you can demonstrate an intent to comply, but you can't demonstrate the actuality of going ahead and deleting and showing that you have deleted the requisite records. Lack of process for data changes and approvals, and no impact assessment. So, who is affected, which other systems, what are the interdependencies? It's the connect part that allows you to show the control. So a connected data governance, a connected data governance approach for ClaimFast would, unsurprisingly, involve people, process, and technology. In the center, it's popular to draw data itself. I'm implying that data is part of the whole picture here, but from a people, process, or a technology perspective, we need to consider that. And in this example, the people and process that we think about are supported by some technology, and in this case, the Informatica tools I described. Helps us demonstrate data protection by design and reducing further regulatory risk exposure. So what are we trying to do? Proactively identify data-related risk and compliance issues. In other words, don't sit and wait for something to be flagged or for an audit to find that for you. Get ahead of the game a little bit in that relationship with the regulator, but also, as again, papers on the Victor Davis website, we've talked about GDPR and the requirement to comply, but also that requirement to comply can drive a competitive advantage if you can evidence that you're treating data about your data subjects, your customers, your prospects, even your employees in a compliant way, in a responsible way, then that itself can further enhance rather than detract from your business reputation. Do we have the people, process, and technology in place? And then we're looking for some specifics, a catalog of business relevant metadata. And then, so that's the catalog I referred to, then the connections between things like data sets, processes, policies, of course, stakeholders. And then on the technical side, a catalog of technical metadata. And that's going to describe the data that exists in applications, in the systems you have out there, but also how it's used, how has it been used, how could it be used. And then consistency and connection between both of those different points of view. In fact, a unified data strategy across your business. So fast forward to a situation where ClaimFast have sorted this. We have a strategic approach to the management of data initiatives. And that really means looking at the roadmap from here on. What am I intending to do? What's my best next action in terms of developing the way I manage and, if you like, exploit the value of data? Do I have my application portfolio cataloged and connected? Do I know what I've already got in my application estate? And are those initiatives that I refer to, are they cataloged and also connected? Again, catalog, connect, and control, get that culture in place for metadata. And I think it's relatively easy to talk about the problem, as I've done today. Illustrate that in your own companies with some examples. What would be the impact of coming up with a policy that everybody agrees on at a business level, and then thinking that that's what you're going to do at a technical level, only to find that you haven't, and you've in fact got no way of doing that. So illustrate the problems to help build a culture in which you have fixed those problems. And so here we are, ClaimFast now operating with a proactive data management board. So some kind of insert word that your organization would use here, but it's an empowered group of people who understand ownership. They understand what they're trying to do, in terms of exploiting the value of data, and they understand their responsibilities in terms of looking after it. And you're balancing, this is back to the data delta at the start of the slides, we're balancing that, that picture. The other continuum I talked about between monetization and ethics can come into this as well. So now the scenario where you're looking into an alert that's surfaced on a GDPR retention scheduling report, we can jump in and see what would happen. What would happen next, and I'll say the next few slides, there are quite a few of them, but what I will do is just to show the screens that help us identify a problem and do something about it in the ClaimFast case. And as we said at the start of the presentation, we'll share this material, so you're welcome to inspect it, but do feel free to come back and ask specific questions on any of the steps that I've got here. But to start with, the report indicates that personal data has been scheduled for deletion on the wrong date. What we're going to need to do here, remember we have a policy that says over 3 years of inactivity means that we're going to delete, as per the GDPR, that data. We're going to need to understand where the data on this report originates from, how the system, well, basically just the lineage of that data, and so we can begin to investigate what's going on. So connected data governance does all the things I've mentioned so far, people, process, and tech, and we get an insight into each other's worlds. I'm showing here, just kicking off the Axon product from Informatica. And then this DGCM, so what I'm saying here is the Data Governance Committee member, so a person who's in that board that I just referred to, gets access and has a look to what we have in this data governance solution, and ends up being appointed the owner of the report. So they're now able to see and understand where the data in that report has come from. You can see graphically in the center there, we're beginning to build up a picture of the provenance of that data from an IT point of view, I guess. Let's have a look, let's review the data retention policy. What is it that we agreed that we would do as per the GDPR? So here is, in the sort of glossary style, a picture and a description of that data retention policy. So queries that relate then to the process and the requirements, the regulatory requirements surrounding it, can then be referred to the relevant owner in the context of the policy that we're talking about. So this, I guess the word context is important here. So everything is contextual. We're not trying to solve every problem for every person. We're trying to focus in quickly on where did the data come from, who owns it, is anything wrong with it, in which processes, and in which systems is it used. So if we then have a look at the data quality lineage graph, it's highlighting that an issue relates to the date attribute, and further that it's been deteriorating in recent weeks, and that so far has gone undetected until now. Now the problem is understood. There could be other problems, of course, but certainly this is something worth following up. What we do, and the screen shows here, EDC, so the Enterprise Data Catalog. There's some artificial intelligence and machine learning capability in EDC, which is going to help us with some auto discovery. That's enabling us to build a bridge between what I've called the dividing worlds, if you like, by mapping IT systems to business concepts, beginning the business of the connection between the business and IT communities. So those worlds, as I said, as I introduced the Informatica tools, the way Informatica have done it is Axon is more geared towards the business community, EDC more geared to the tech community. There's been some thinking about pre-integration and mapping between those two tools. And in fact, those of you who are interested on the Informatica side, those two tools coming closer together actually in the future roadmap of those two tools to reflect what we're talking about today. Other tools out there will approach this in a different way, maybe in a single integrated tool set, but still with the idea that some screens, some access points would be more suited for tech, or a business persona. And very often you'll find that word used to describe the different types of users that would access this sort of integrated metadata. So going back to the data governance user, tracing the lineage map, lineage for data, very topical at the moment. The last couple of years, many of you will have noticed plenty of people writing about this kind of thing. Where's my data come from? It's not a new request, but I think it's received a lot more emphasis these last couple of years due to things like GDPR, but also just an insistence on knowing, can I trust this data? Where's it come from which system? Who's the owner down the line? Once I know where the data's come from, not only the system, but I begin to understand who owns that system. So I can contact those individuals and find out if there is a known issue. And I can take a look at the people involved here and who they might be. And in fact, there are some smarts in the tools to try and infer who might be the owner if this is incomplete. And how does it do that? Well, by looking at similar systems or systems that use similar data and cover similar processes and make some inference about who it might be. So that system owner suggests the issue relates to a change of date. They would know what has been happening, what changes have been made recently, and we follow through and find, not just in this report, but we're finding that up to 28,000 records appear to have been affected. So the realization, I said earlier in the presentation, it's a bit tricky to do this manually. The sheer volume of records, but the metadata that describes those records and the linkage between the metadata means it's going to be tricky to do this in other than an automated way. So the data governance user realizes this isn't a quick fix and we're going to have to work with IT to get this done. So the relevant system owner has already identified a change request can be issued then to fix that date field and to attend to the correct format on the relevant reports. So that change request is created in Axon. So this sort of kicks off a series of workflow events to actually affect and trace that change request. So various emails facilitating that whole workflow to inform people that the change request has been raised. In other words, who's interested in that? Well, it's the request itself, but it's also the demonstrable compliance piece. Have you done something to fix this? May well be a question internally, but also from the regulator. You can evidence that you have, and not only that, but you're tracking it. And so in the change request, in line with the workflow process that has been put together for change requests in Axon, and there's some things out of the box, but there's some configurable items too. How do we escalate? Who is responsible? Who authorizes these kinds of requests? And note here that the change request, we're talking about the IT user now, but the change request from technical individuals profile will include more technical data, such as the systems and the relationships around data that are affected here. Now, it's also impact analysis. Once you have that cataloging and that connection, you can begin to control, as I've said more than once in this presentation, looking at which other reports, which other systems are affected if I've made a change, is going to give me, or using that high-level summary of the data lineage is going to give me the confidence to go ahead. And then back into the enterprise data catalog for a detailed technical analysis of the specific attributes around that date attribute. And again, a nice sort of graphical picture here. As I said, the EDC tool does a good job of inferring discovery and inference of relationships. So together with that lineage, the impact and the relationships associated with the data attribute, a visual map is often a nice way to go. Perhaps the first time people have seen something like this describing their own systems. If that IT user is interested, why are we worried about this? What is it that we're trying to do here? Then they can trace all the way back to the data retention policy itself. And by, as I said, in an M&A situation specifically, you may think there's no ambiguity in terms of business definitions and glossary items, but the company just acquired may have a different way of referring to policies or indeed customers, or indeed other commonly shared elements. And so reviewing associated glossary terms is going to make sense. And then it says here, so it must be true, that business and IT users are working in concert, using consistent and connected descriptions of data assets and a common understanding of that whole context, in this case, the business and regulatory terminologies that we're using. So the connection, the collaboration was the word I used earlier in the collaboration corridor. One example of this is around the data that describes what people are doing rather than what they're doing itself. And if we want to look around a bit further, the IT user here, any other aspects of the business user's request, then the search feature on Axon enables us to build up this contextual search again for the relevant, the contextual, and the word relevant linked here, because I'm not just looking for glossary terms, I'm looking for them in the context of what I was doing. Or move back into EDC to look for specific systems, their assets, and the resources that describe them. So the resolution of this, and again, the demonstrable aspect of the resolution of this is shown quite nicely. So we reformat the date field, feedback to Axon what we're doing. Both the data governance group and the IT users can monitor what's happening, and the data quality metric from now on. So like I say, in the upcoming period, to ensure the issue is resolved. And what we're shown here is that the metrics surrounding data quality for the date field has returned to within acceptable limits, gone green again. So the connected governance approach, we can proactively set up a project to identify other reports, and that it's easy to say proactive in a presentation like this, but an example of what you might then do is to say, now I know this. Now I've followed through the provenance of data. I've inspected the connections, the impact assessment, so on. Let's look proactively, and let's begin to build into the processes that surround metadata here. Let's build in some proactivity to look for other issues in advance. So system lineage map back to Axon, identifying which users across the business are connected to potentially affected systems or reports. And then roles. A lot of back to the connection, the collaboration corridor, not for want of trying really, in many organizations, what is it that I need to do to collaborate more? And often it's identification of roles and new responsibilities around data that is the key to that. So combining business and IT knowledge to identify and then mitigate further potential risk areas. So back to Victor Davis, the data delta and that think big and implement small. How would we get started with all of this? So crossing the data delta suggests this series of thin slices in order to approach any of a series of data management initiatives. That advice holds for this topic, really, metadata and catalog management. So have in mind a model that is pervasive in your organization. What we're looking for really is engagement. As I said at the start of the presentation, most organizations have done something around cataloging, around glossary, around modeling tools in the past. What they may have failed to do is to get uniform engagement from business people, from IT people, in order to ensure when they look at risk holistically, or when they're looking at compliance, they do so across the organization. So have in mind a model that is pervasive. It's going to involve technology. I think we've made the case to say it's too complex not to, but make sure you start small. That engagement word is here. So ensure early engagement and measure that. Try and get people saying, well, I don't know what they've done, but suddenly I'm beginning to understand how policies, how initiatives, how stakeholders are all related. Small words like that are, the beginning of change, really. And then emphasize it's the connection we're looking for. It's connected data governance we're after. Probably allow business and IT groups to make a start, maybe on their own, but it's okay to make that start, but have in mind that they will be linked fairly early on in this program. So there's a few things you can look at in terms of assets from Victor Davis. So white paper on the Victor Davis website, data governance white paper. The Data Delta book I've referred to is available online, but it's also available as a free download from our website. Just register and you're welcome to take a look at that. There's a number of short videos as well, which cover how do business and IT folks get together to meet that data governance challenge. Other advice on how to get started then is take that thin slice approach, have that holistic connected picture in mind, but sort of inch towards it in a series of connected initiatives. The engagement model with selected stakeholders, it's okay to target certain key individuals or groups of people, trying to turn them into advocates for this program, drive engagement around that. I would even do that at the expense of completeness in the early stages. Fully cataloging, connecting, and achieving complete control in a large global organization can take a long time, but making a start that builds confidence and engagement is something that can definitely be done fairly easily. So look at business metadata and begin to describe the context that we're looking at. Simultaneously begin that technical metadata discovery task. And then keep it interesting, generate interesting reports, a bit like the early days of business intelligence, really, sort of show the art of the possible. Now you have that information at your disposal. So I think that's all I plan to formally say. As I say, I've rushed somewhat through the screens part to illustrate what's happening in my world of connected data governance for ClaimFast. But you're very welcome to peruse those slides after this presentation and bring any questions to us. I think we have a moment or two for some questions now.
I think we're out of time actually, and there are no questions that I can see that have come through. I'll give people a couple of seconds to see if anything pings up. No, nothing coming through. So in that case, I say thank you very much for attending today, and you will get a copy of the slides and the recording, which we will send through to you in the next couple of days.
Okay, thank you, everybody.